Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. So I wouldn't typically do a video like this, but I've tried screen recording and my fan on my computer ends up making a lot of noise, so we're actually going to just do it off of my phone and then just record my computer. So I know that it's not ideal, but we're going to just go with it. So today, as I told you recently, we're going to talk a little bit about diabetes. So diabetes is something that's very important to me. It's something that has been very interesting to me for a very long time. So I thought we would kind of talk about it. We're not going to talk about everything today, and nor can we, because there is so much that we can learn about diabetes. So we're just going to get into some of the basics today. I'm obviously not an expert. I'm a kid. I am not a professional in diabetes. I am not an endocrinologist, not a diabetes educator. I don't focus in this. I don't know everything, and so I don't have all the answers, nor can I explain everything as well as some people could, but I'm going to try my best today. If you will allow me to just kind of explain some of the things I know. So I am using some websites just to kind of verify some things, get a couple of facts, but I also have some prior knowledge myself, so I'm going to kind of share some of that with you today. So I've attempted to give presentations on diabetes before, and it's kind of a touchy subject for some people. I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what it is. And one of my big goals about sharing about diabetes is to help people understand what it is, what it truly is, not those common misconceptions, but also what it isn't. And that goes back to the misconception part. Like, what is diabetes and also what is it not? Because a lot of us know what it's not. We think we know what it is, but we actually don't. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The thing is, diabetes is not really something we often talk a lot about in school or I don't know, wherever else you might learn things, but it's just not something that people often hear a lot about. And when people do, they kind of just have these assumptions made about it. And I want people to understand what it really truly is, because it really is a big deal. It's not a word to just throw around because we can. So I'm not trying to say that if you know some of the things that are actually not true about it, that's bad. But I just want people to understand like what it really is. So it's okay if you don't know anything about it right now. I hope that by the end of this, we're going to do a variety of videos. This is just an intro today. I'm going to have some more videos on diabetes coming up in the future. But I hope that you find some interest in this. I think that this is a very fascinating topic, but I get it that it's not for everybody. So if this is not your jam, then feel free to skip this video. If you will give me a chance though, I think that you'll find great value in watching this video today. So I like to start with a little introduction, and anytime that if I were to actually give a presentation on diabetes, I would definitely start with an introduction. Before we get into any of the details, scientific or not, I want people to think about what they already know. I know that this sounds like a school session and your teacher's like, so what do you already know? What do you want to know? But I think it can be very helpful to you if you think about what you already know. So I kind of came up with some prompts for you here. So thinking about what you already know, thinking about words, phrases, or images that come to mind when I say the word diabetes. Thinking about if you know someone with diabetes. If you know someone, do you know what they kind of do, what kind of things they need to do on a daily basis, what kind of tools they use? Do you know of different types of diabetes? Because there are different types of diabetes. Today we're just going to talk about in general diabetes. We're going to mention a few types, but we're going to go into the types more specifically later. And then, of course, what would you like to learn? I hope that you go into anything with just an open mind, and maybe this is just not interesting to you at all. Like right now, you really want to click pause on this video. But again, please give me a chance. I think that especially if you consider like what would you like to learn, I think that can really help you. I mean, we're not going to go through everything today, nor am I going to go through everything ever, because there's always more we can learn. And the cool thing about diabetes is that there is not a cure to diabetes, and And I mean, that's not cool. That's not the cool thing. But the cool thing is that we're always coming out with more information on diabetes. People are always learning more about it, and research is going into this topic every single day. So it's very fascinating, a lot that we can learn. And I don't want to take all your time to do this video today, but these videos are just intended to be short and sweet, just to get some basics across to you. And today is literally just going to be the basics. So hopefully it won't be super long. So thinking about what you want to learn, thinking about what aspects might interest you. If you don't know anything about it, cool, then anything might be interesting. But if you have heard of it, what are some things that you would like to learn a little bit more about? Some things that might interest you. And then how might learning about this impact your life? Believe it or not, there's a lot that we can do to support this cause, and more than you maybe realize right now. So thinking about how this can impact your life. Maybe you do know someone with diabetes. How might learning about how you can help them, right? What I would usually say in presentations, one of the best things that you can do, whether or not you know someone with diabetes, but knowing how you can help them, not even in the case of an emergency, but just knowing how you can support them mentally and physically through their life, not just in diabetes, but just because diabetes is just one thing that they're dealing with in life. We all deal with a lot of different things, and unfortunately diabetes is a really big struggle for people, but it's incredible the people that go through each day of their life with just this amazing strength, and they make it through every single day with their head held high. And I'm sure some days are harder than others. I don't have diabetes, but I know people who do, and I can't say I know exactly what they're going through because I don't, but I can try to put myself in their shoes and understand where they're coming from and the struggles that they feel. But I will say that these are some of the strongest people in the world who go through this every day. It's amazing what they can do. So they're definitely stronger than I am. So, and then the last question I have is, do you know any common misconceptions about diabetes? Do you know anything that a lot of people make assumptions about that maybe you make assumptions about too? And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong. We all make assumptions about different things, and I know that there are a lot about this. And one of our videos, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the myths about diabetes. I have another separate presentation that I made a while back, and it goes through some myths on diabetes and some things that we're actually probably very familiar with, some of those common myths, and you go, oh, that's actually not true. And that's totally fine. That's kind of a big point of my videos, is to show people that and help people understand, not to make you feel bad, but to make you understand what it really is to better help people. And that's one of my biggest goals in life, is just to help people as much as I can. So just a little introduction for you. Now we're going to get into some of the basics. So thinking about it, today we're just talking about the generals of diabetes. So we have a few different types of diabetes, which we'll get into in a second. So depending on the type of diabetes, it's kind of going to vary how much insulin is being produced. So insulin is a hormone that brings down your blood sugar, your blood glucose, or your blood sugar level. So in diabetes, and it depends on the type, it's really hard when I'm trying to talk about in general, because I want to talk about one specifically to better explain this, but I'm trying to talk about it in general, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of hard, but thinking about insulin, so insulin is a hormone that lowers blood sugar levels, or your blood glucose levels. So our body uses insulin to get glucose. Let's start from the beginning. So you eat food, you eat those carbs, those sugars. If you've ever seen like a carbohydrate amount on the nutrition facts, your body is breaking down those sugars in your food and turning it into glucose for energy. And in order to turn that food into energy, into glucose for energy in the body needs insulin. So with a specific type, I'm going to have to say what type it is, because otherwise this is going to get really confusing. So in type 1 diabetes, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, in type 1 diabetes, I don't know how well you can see this, but the body is not able to produce enough insulin. When there's a lack of insulin, the body cannot cannot reach the glucose in the bloodstream there and then get it to provide energy for the body. In type 2, it is called an insulin resistance. The body's not able to use the insulin as it should. So it depends on the insulin that's being produced, how much insulin is being produced, and then how the body is using the insulin. So in type 2 diabetes, and there's another type that we're going to talk about too, but in type 2 diabetes, the body's not able to use insulin, again, for the phrase insulin resistance. So we use our insulin to break down those carbohydrates to get energy in the form of glucose. So insulin is that hormone that lowers our blood sugar levels. Those are the levels of our sugar in our blood. The more scientific term for it is blood glucose levels, or blood glucose, but it's blood sugar. It's because glucose is a type of sugar. So insulin lowers the blood sugar levels, and then there's also a hormone called glucagon, which is very similar to glucose, but glucagon actually raises blood sugar levels. So in someone who doesn't have type 1 diabetes, the body has that kind of maintained level of insulin. The insulin is being produced as it should. I talk about it when I talk to people about it. I talk about it as kind of an automatic versus a manual system. Think about an automatic versus a manual vehicle. If you're like, I didn't live in the time of manual transmission vehicles, but if you did, you're going to have to manually change gears in your car. Now today we just have automatic transmission, which is great. But that is what's happening with someone with diabetes. Let's say with either type 1 or type 2, you're having to give yourself insulin manually because the body's not producing insulin as it should. Or in the case of type 2, it's not able to use that insulin. Type 2 is a little bit different. I'm more familiar with type 1, but type 2, there are medications outside of type 1 and type 2, outside of insulin for type 1 and type 2, but type 1, people need insulin for sure. Type 2, not necessarily. They don't necessarily need to give themselves insulin injections, but they're going to have to give themselves insulin because the body's not automatically making it in the amounts that it should when it should. And the body is producing insulin to lower blood sugar levels at different times, and raising blood sugar with glucagon at different times of day, like when you're eating, when you're exercising, when you're sleeping. It all varies. When you're ill, when you're stressed, your blood sugar levels are going to change. And so we have a good balance of that insulin and that glucagon to raise and lower blood sugar as necessary. So when we have that insulin is not getting to where it needs to be, we're not able to break down those carbohydrates in our food, and we're not able to get the glucose for energy, which is not great. If you can imagine, not having that proper energy you need, your body is not functioning as it should. And I think in our next video, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the symptoms and kind of what's going on in the body and why some of those symptoms actually occur. I know we talk a lot about symptoms for different illnesses, different diseases, but do we really understand why those symptoms occur? And actually, there's very good reason why some of the symptoms occur in diabetes. So we also have this, and by the way, these highlighted terms here, these are some key kind of vocab words, if you will. So our next one here is autoimmune disease, which is what we call diabetes. It's an autoimmune disease, which means that the immune system mistakes good cells for bad cells and attacks them. The body looks at these cells as being foreign cells and they attack them. And they're actually good cells, but they attack them, and that's what kind of causes our problem. And there are different autoimmune diseases. I didn't list them. We can get into some more details about that another time, but there are definitely other autoimmune diseases. So this is our endocrine system. And I highlighted this because the word endocrine is used a lot. If you talk about someone who studies the endocrine system, they are called an endocrinologist. The study of the endocrine system is endocrinology, so you're going to hear that term a lot. The endocrine system is where the pancreas is, which is where like the whole main part of diabetes there. So the pancreas is where this is occurring, which is right here. Also part of the endocrine system are our reproductive functions there, our adrenal glands, our pancreas, our thyroid, our pineal gland, our pituitary gland, like the hypothalamus. We actually just talked about this in school. But these are all part of the endocrine system. So when you're people who study the endocrine system, they're studying, these are all different hormones. All of these produce different hormones. So like our pancreas is producing our insulin and glucagon. And then we have our thyroid producing different things. Our pituitary gland is helping with our producing other hormones, helping to reach other hormones as well. And then we have potential problems for each of these as well. So like one we often hear a lot about is like our hypo and hyperthyroidism, which we also talk about in diabetes as hypo and why am I not thinking right now? Sorry, hypo and hyperglycemia is what we also talk about in diabetes, low and high blood sugars. So those are different parts of the endocrine system, but just to show you, this is where our pancreas is, which is where our diabetes is taking place. And I'm going to just skip ahead. I'm going to go back to that slide. But this is more specifically, this is what the pancreas looks like right here. This is the endocrine portion of the pancreas here. These are our islets of Langerhans. It looks like islets, but it's actually islets. They are part of the B cells in producing insulin. The B cells or the beta cells, those are what produce the insulin. There are also T cells, A cells, things like that. And then we have our stomach, our blood here, and then these are our hormones, our glucagon and insulin in the bloodstream. And then this is our pancreas shown on a whole body as well. So going back to this slide here, when, why, and how. So when is diabetes typically diagnosed? So it depends on the type of diabetes. So type 1 diabetes is definitely more common in children and younger people, but it can actually be diagnosed really at any time. By the way, as well, type 2 diabetes is more common than type 1. We hear a lot about type 1 diabetes, but type 2 diabetes is actually more common than type 1 diabetes. But obviously, type 1 diabetes is still a thing. I know multiple people who have type 1 diabetes. So type 1 diabetes is usually diagnosed at a young age. At one time, it was actually called juvenile diabetes. So, because it was often associated with younger age groups. But now that's not a term we use as much, knowing that diabetes can really be diagnosed anytime. But again, still more common in younger audiences. And it's also, and so with type 2 diabetes, it is more common with, I should have flipped my slides and talked about the types first, sorry. So in type 2 diabetes, it's more common for older people, although it is becoming more common in younger audiences. That kind of leads us into, why do people get diabetes? There's not really a set reason why people get it necessarily. Part of it is by genetics, especially having a parent or a sibling with diabetes. Sometimes with a parent or sibling, kids of someone with diabetes or a sibling, they get studied to and they get checked to see if they can if they are expected to get diabetes. We can't really completely 100% say that this person will get diabetes, but I believe that there are things that they can do to kind of get an idea if you're a family member with someone with diabetes, if you might get diabetes as well. So it is kind of interesting, the technology that they have today and all the studies that they do today, but part of it is genetics sometimes, especially with type 2 diabetes. It is kind of a genetic thing. With type 2 diabetes, it's not always true, but it is also sometimes with obesity, puts you at higher risk for type 2 diabetes. And that's why we're also seeing kind of a spark there with kids in type 2 diabetes, as there are more children who are obese today. So it's becoming more common in that as well. But that's not to say that all kids are going to get it. That's not to say that all adults get type 2 diabetes. It really varies, and it can be diagnosed in either. But it is, we see it more in older people. And then I did not mention another one is our gestational diabetes. Gestational diabetes is diagnosed during pregnancy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I'm not as familiar with that one, but how is it diagnosed? It is diagnosed with, there are labs that can be done, blood tests to check blood sugar levels. And then there's also, so then from that, you would look at blood sugar levels on a scale here, looking at what is considered low and what is considered high. There's a scale of low blood sugars and high blood sugars. Before someone is diagnosed, their blood sugars are going to be, they skyrocket. They get really, really high, especially with type 1 diabetes. So your blood sugar is getting really, really high, and that's what causes some of our symptoms, which we'll talk about probably in our next video. So they see really high blood sugars, and that kind of puts you in that range where you could be diagnosed with diabetes. We also have a range a little bit before that diabetes diagnosis range called our prediabetes, which is literally how it sounds. It's before diabetes. It's your diagnosis before diabetes. Some people have prediabetes and they don't know it. Some people get diagnosed with it and it takes a bit for them to actually get diagnosed with diabetes potentially. Symptoms, it kind of varies how quickly symptoms come on, and again, we can talk about that a little bit more later, but sometimes diabetes is also, medical professionals will also look at it as, yeah, you have a lot of these symptoms, they probably need to do further checks, but you also see kind of a common grouping of symptoms there that could really kind of make it so that it seems that you have diabetes, so that, I don't know what I'm trying to say. So that kind of shows medical professionals too, okay, well, we should maybe get you tested. It seems like you have some of those very common symptoms. That's not to say, though, for sure you have diabetes. Some of those symptoms are similar to other types of illnesses and diseases. So you would probably typically do sorry, that didn't make sense. You would typically do a blood test, I would think. And there are different types of blood tests as well. We already talked about this. Some other potential problems of the pancreas are the pancreatic cancer, is pancreatic cancer, which we've heard of a couple people recently. Did Ruth Bader Ginsburg have pancreatic cancer? I'm not sure. But Alex Trebek had pancreatic cancer. It is not good. It is a cancer of the pancreas, and it is not good. There are ways to kind of prolong life after a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, but it's not good. It's likely that you will not make it very, very long after the diagnosis. I know it's really hard to say, but it is not a good cancer. No cancer is good, but not good. And then pancreatitis, there are a few different types. There's an acute pancreatitis, hereditary, which is inherited, and then chronic is a bit more severe, and that is just a word for inflammation of the pancreas. Very painful, and it can lead to other problems potentially. Also, cystic fibrosis is related to the pancreas as well. So what cystic fibrosis is, or CF, we might hear it as sometimes, is blockage of tubes in the pancreas because of a mucus buildup. They often have, sometimes breathing problems and a lot of mucus buildup and making it a little bit hard to breathe. So I'm not as familiar with cystic fibrosis. I'd like to learn a little bit more about it. If you read the book 5 Feet Apart or watched the movie, they have CF. So I know that it's a made-up story, but it's a real thing, cystic fibrosis. So some different types of diabetes. So we have type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes, and prediabetes. Prediabetes is, I included in there because it's that, again, kind of that part before being diagnosed with diabetes. Your blood sugar levels are higher than they should be to be considered normal, but not quite to that extent of diabetes. You can't quite be diagnosed with diabetes. So it kind of puts you on a scale there with your blood sugar. So type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, they have this crazy word here called mellitus. Some people say it as mellitus, whatever you want to say. Sometimes it's abbreviated as T1D, that's how I abbreviate it, or T1DM, type 1 diabetes mellitus, T2DM, type 2 diabetes mellitus, if you want to be more scientific. But we're going to talk a little bit more about specifics about these and what's going on with both of these, but these are just a few different types. Type 1, type 2, gestational again occurs during pregnancy, and then prediabetes as well. So, I know that this was a long video. I know that this was about 25 minutes. I hope you guys learned something today. Again, this is something I'm very passionate about. If it's not something that's quite your jam after this video, you're like, you know what? I'm good. This was a lot of science, sort of. I didn't really get into super scientific stuff today, but this was a little bit much for me. Totally fine. Don't feel free to not worry about these videos in the future. But I think that this could be very beneficial if you do watch these. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I love talking about this. I can't tell you all sorts of things, but if you do have questions, you can ask, or of course reach out to someone who is definitely more skilled than I am. But I hope you guys are having a super awesome weekend. I am going to post my video that I recorded yesterday. It is Indy and I outside. A reminder, if you haven't seen my other videos, Indy is my dog. So Indy and I were outside in the snow yesterday. I'm going to post that, and then I'm going to post this video as well. So feel free to check those out. And yeah, it's Saturday, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday on Monday. And yeah, I hope you guys are having a fantastic weekend. I don't think we're really doing a whole lot, but hopefully you guys are doing something sort of exciting. So have an awesome rest of your day, an awesome weekend, and I will hopefully be back with you tomorrow or Monday, potentially. Thanks, guys.